how do we use the most modern technology to turn back the aging clock from a cellular level? But that's the advanced stuff. And I always tell people, if you don't have all the other stuff right, there's no reason to go there.
All right, Darshan Shah, what a treat, man.
So great to be here. I love it out here. This is beautiful. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I've been really, really looking forward to this, and just a big admirer of your work. And you know, we share in some ways kind of similar paths because we're both entrepreneurs, and in the wellness industry, if you will. I ran this wellness festival called Wanderlust. You've had many successful entrepreneurial endeavors, most currently Next Health.
Right.
So maybe you can tell people a little bit about Next Health as we get into it for anyone who's not familiar with it. But despite being in the wellness industry, we both found ourselves at one juncture patently unwell, which of course holds a great irony. So maybe just as a way to begin our conversation and scaffold it a little bit, maybe you can let our listeners in a little bit on your personal journey of kind of discovering where you found yourself in 2013.
Right. Yeah. So I was very fortunate that I knew from a very young age that I wanted to go into medicine and become a doctor. And I didn't really realize how much work it took. So I just kind of blindly just went for it. And I was very lucky that I was able to, through a bunch of fortunate events, I was able to graduate from medical school when I was 21 years old. And I then found my calling in being a surgeon. I just loved being in the operating room, just being able to affect a direct change with my hands in someone's life. It was just incredible to me what I was seeing. And so I learned to be a surgeon. Surgery residency, surgery training is grueling. You are up 2-3 days in a row sometimes. Sleep is definitely your last priority. Hopefully you get to eat in between cases. You just eat whatever you can find. And, you're stressed all the time. It's a lot of stress, a lot of life and death stress, but also when you're training in surgery, your senior surgeons are not necessarily known as like the nicest people in the world. So, there was always like this thing about surgery residency being the roughest training program there is. And so I definitely went through all that. And that was about 8 years of my life after medical school. Wow. And then the next 12 years I spent building a practice, which is a business basically. And so I built a really big practice. We own multiple surgical centers. I was working in the business as a surgeon, 12, 14-hour days of surgery almost every day, believe it or not. And then I was paying bills, hiring employees, doing my taxes, all that stuff.
Reviewing the P&L.
Reviewing the P&L. Yeah. All of that, the other 14 hours a day,
Oh, man.
So before I knew it, when you're working like that, your self-care and your health, your personal health become the last priority, right? Everything else is just grabbing your attention. And you even putting together wellness festivals, you experienced this, right? You knew what was happening. And
I can't say it was.
Can you just be a little bit closer to the mic?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I wouldn't say it was exactly surgery. It was a different kind of surgery. I had to apply many a scalpel, I suppose. But it's similar in terms of the hours.
Yes.
So highly labor intensive,
Right.
Also very capital intensive.
Right.
But you're building mini towns, basically. And for us, it was on these massive ski resorts. We would come in with a dozen semis and build through the day, through the night, and then people start coming in, and your whole mind changes from the build to essentially like a customer experience, and then trying to actually put some magic into it too, so people can have that immersive transcendental experience. And then of course everyone goes home all lit up and had a great time, and then your work is not done. And so, yeah, these were, stints of, we would go at our peak. I think we had 68 festivals in 20 countries annually.
Wow.
So I couldn't even go to them all. Wow. But my family, my girls, grew up basically in the circus. I mean, we did it all summer long, and when I wasn't, chasing my own tail at the events themselves, I was chasing the financing and the partnerships and the sponsorships to actually finance the endeavor. And I mean, my life was insane.
So your cortisol levels up here all the time, right?
All the time.
Just like mine.
Yeah. And just like wicked insomnia because
Right.
you essentially your baseline is 2 hours, 4 hours a night.
Right. Exactly.
And when you're 25, maybe, but that catches up with you as we'll discuss.
It did.
Yeah.
It did. And when I was 40 years old, I found myself in a really bad physical state, 40 pounds overweight, maybe 50 pounds overweight. But worse than that was just a triad of diseases that had developed. So I had metabolic syndrome, I had hypertension, heart disease, basically, and also autoimmune disease. And so I had all three of these things going on. My metabolic disease was not controlled by metformin. So they were talking about the next step being stronger medications, even up to insulin. My hypertension was uncontrolled on 3 medications. So, when you max out a dose of one, then you put another one on, and you max out a dose of that, and that doesn't work, you put another one on. So I was struggling. And then my autoimmune disease was basically a form of scleroderma that was eating away at the skin of my scalp and the bone of my skull on the left side of my forehead. Gosh. And so it was just, I was spiraling. And not only that, I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe, I couldn't sleep. I had sleep apnea, all of these things all together at the same time. And it was a kind of a disastrous situation. And I knew it was happening, but I still kept pounding away, and then my son was born in 2016. Mm-hmm. And after, it was at 10:19 p.m. at night. And after he went to the nursery and everyone was asleep, I went down to the doctor's lounge because I had access because the same hospital I do surgery in was where I delivered the son. So I go to the doctor's lounge. I'm like, I'm sure there's a donut or two left over from the morning. And I go down there and someone had left a New England Journal of Medicine on the table. And I opened up the New England Journal of Medicine and there's an article about all-cause mortality in people with autoimmune disease and other medical diagnoses. It's like, that's me. I should read this article. And so I read it. And there's a chart in there showing, like, with my biomarker levels where they were, there was about a 50% chance of death from any cause in the next 20 years. Mm-hmm. So for me, that meant 50% chance of death before I saw my son that was just born a couple hours ago being alive to graduate college, to, all these things. I wouldn't be there to see any of it. And that was kind of a major wake-up call for me.
Yeah. And the amazing thing here is that, you vividly describe your conditions, but those conditions are not abnormal now. In fact, people listening to this are probably saying, oh yeah, that sounds like me.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got hypertension.
Right.
Oh, I've got metabolic syndrome, like 88 or 90% of the other people in the United States and most people undiagnosed, right?
Right.
I have some form of autoimmune disease. So essentially what has happened is, we've created something that is very, very abnormal. Like metabolic syndrome was as common as like Stone Man syndrome or something.
Exactly.
100 years ago or even 50 years ago. So what is it? I mean, I'm not an evolutionary biologist by any means, but from what I remember about genetics, the underlying genome changes very, very slowly over great swaths of time.
Yeah.
So we don't really have genetics that are that different than we did 50 years ago or 100 years ago or even 150 years ago. So why are we seeing these cresting tsunami waves of conditions like the ones you had?
Yeah, and you mentioned one of the answers to that question is evolutionary biology. We've evolved over thousands of generations, humans have, but we've only spent the last 10 generations or so in this new environment that our genetics have not been able to catch up. In fact, our genetics are wired to do the exact opposite of the environment that we currently live in.
Right.
Our genetics are programmed to hold on to energy in cases of famine coming up, right? That's what our genetics are programmed to do.
That's right. Yeah.
But we live in this state of the opposite of famine. There's an overabundance of calories all the time, right? We're genetically wired to love sweet things because that's programmed into us to store glucose for periods of when we don't have it, winters. And unfortunately, we're in this environment now where we are exposed to massive amounts of these things. And so I think we've created this environment over the last 50 years. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Like some people call it the comfort crisis, which is part of it. Yes, technology has evolved at an incredible rate where we can make ourselves live in an incredibly comfortable environment. There's also a lot of conspiracy around, the food industry. And, I always say like the food industry is a capitalistic industry that developed because it was made to develop based on policies that we created when we thought there wasn't going to be enough food for us.
Yeah, we were trying to like scratching our heads and being like, how do we create enough shelf-stable, cheap calories to support 8 billion people going on 10 billion people? And so, hey, there was the farm bills and the agricultural, the sort of green revolution post World War II that was very successful at that particular endeavor. Unfortunately, what we've seen now is culture has really hijacked our own biology. I think you put it very well, is that, we've created these evolutionary mismatches that have taken our adaptive mechanisms and used them against us. They made them maladaptive, right? Like you were getting to it. It's like storing fat is adaptive, right?
Yes. we need to store fat for periods of famine, but there hasn't been a famine in a very long time. And now we have all this extra fat stored up that we were evolutionarily programmed to do.
Right.
But I think that the solution is really just education and just knowing that this is what's happening. I think, you and I have both cured ourselves. We've turned everything around, just following some simple practices that our body likes. And I think that those things are not that hard to follow and to do if you get into a good set of habits and routines in your life to go down those paths. It's hard. It's hard to just kind of know what they are. But once you get into those routines, I think people can make big changes in their own lives.
Yeah. Well, let's go there. So, metabolic syndrome, that's a huge one. I mean, for me, as I was telling you before we started recording, I was kind of right on the cusp there of that, of kind of diabetic blood glucose levels. I had a 6.7% hemoglobin A1C, which is kind of on like the lowest end of the diabetic range, but on the highest end of pre-diabetes. And, I know you've been a champion of like CGM, so I wear a continuous glucose monitor. I was at about 125 milligrams per deciliter fasting. And then, it looked like the Swiss Alps, right? So I'd have these big spikes and then massive valleys. Yeah. So I'd get these huge crashes. And then in response to the crashes, of course, then you want to consume, more generally refined, ultra-processed foods, right? To make you feel better.
Right.
So I had to break that pattern. So, maybe you could kind of outline kind of the foundational principles for health and well-being. Yeah. And I think both of us, we're both interested in longevity, but we're both really interested even more than lifespan. We're interested in health span, right? And there's been this kind of distension and morbidity in our country, which is just like, so awful.
Yeah.
So how do we avoid that distension and morbidity?
Right. So that's a packed question.
Yeah,
and I get these questions all the time.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So I see, at Next Health, I see patients and I see probably hundreds of patients every single year. And we have this conversation a lot. Like, how do I get healthy? How do I achieve longevity? How do I get more health span? And I always tell people, we're going to start off, I'm going to give you 3 tools. The first tool I'm going to give you is a paradigm for you to organize all the information. I call that the wellness wheel, and there's 12 points on the wellness wheel. And I can break that down for you, but it starts off with the basics: nutrition, sleep, and movement. And then we move on to kind of Western medicine, where we can really use Western medicine to its advantage and all the technologies have to prevent cardiac disease, brain disease, and cancer. And then from there, we talk about another entire field of medicine, which I'm a huge fan of, called functional medicine. And that includes hormone optimization, gut health, detoxifying your life, and stress and emotional health. And then once we get all that right, all of those points right, those 10 points, then we can talk about longevity. And longevity, I divided up into looking as good as you feel and looking the age that you feel you are, your biological age, not your chronological age, and also how do we use the most modern technology to turn back the aging clock from a cellular level. But that's the advanced stuff. And I always tell people, if you don't have all the other stuff right, there's no reason to go there.
You got to major in the majors.
Exactly. Majoring in the majors.
Ozone therapy, hyperbaric chambers, cryo, that's kind of the last 5 to 10%, basically.
Right, exactly.
You can do all of this stuff that is, frankly, more accessible and more inexpensive, just through, like you said, through education. So maybe we'll start with the first quartile of the clock there.
We can talk about that.
I think you said sleep, exercise, and nutrition.
Right, exactly. So it's just real quick on that, on the hyperbaric chamber. The funniest story I have, one day I walked into Next Health and this guy was getting to the hyperbaric chamber. He did not look like the model of health and he had a little white baggie with him. I said, what's in the baggie? And he said, oh, it's my lunch. I'm going to eat my lunch while I'm in the hyperbaric chamber. I said, okay. Oh, what do you have? What do you have in that bag for lunch? He's like, oh, I just got a burger from down the street.
Oh my God.
From a fast food joint.
Yeah, that says it all right there.
These two did not work. We got to get out of the chamber. Let me sit down and talk to you about the wellness wheel. The second, the kind of second tool, is just hilarious. Some of the things you see sometimes. But just real quick before we start talking, because I think the tools are important. The second tool is what we talked about a little bit earlier, Pareto principle. There's 20% of the information that's going to move the needle 80% for you. Focus in on that, and you will make massive changes in every single one of these categories. So I try to get people, people love going down the rabbit hole. Like, do I eat blueberries or bananas? And, and like, do I do VO2 max training or zone 2? Right. It's like, wait a minute, let's take it a few steps back. Let's go back to what's going to make the most difference. Then the last tool I give people is before we even start talking about health, we talk about habits and how to become, I call it become a habit forming ninja. There's a few rules about habit forming that once you get them right and you start, you're able to almost trick your brain or train your brain into becoming better at forming habits, you can achieve much, much better results. And so have you read this book called Atomic Habits by James Clear? Yeah. He does a really good job about detailing things like habit stacking, about starting minimal, like, what's the best way to do 100 push-ups? Just tell yourself you can do one push-up,
Right. Yeah, that's what I say about ice baths. You don't start with 34-degree water. Exactly. You start with like 60 and do 30 seconds, or just make the shower cold at the end.
Exactly.
This is you slowly will then you can decrease temperature and increase duration over time. But this is also so like how you get into recovery, right?
And the reason that works is because your brain likes rewards and it doesn't like failure, right? So if you try to do 50 degrees for 3.5 minutes and you fail, your brain is going to tell itself we should never do that again. But if you do 60 degrees for 30 seconds to start with, you succeeded and your brain will want to take it further the next time. So there's reasons all these things work psychologically. And we start with learning how to form habits. And it's a very simple discussion, and people are like, they have an aha moment. And so we either do like morning routines, which is another habit forming technique that I think works very well, or evening routines, and then we habit stack. And so once we have those 3 tools down, then we can start talking about the Pareto principle in each one of those topics.
That's great. Okay, so Pareto principle as applied to sleep, let's say.
Okay, so with sleep, the main thing you have to do, there's 3 things about sleep. Number 1 is you have to make sure you don't have sleep apnea. Okay, no matter how hard you try to optimize your sleep, if you have sleep apnea, you're never going to win that battle. Sleep apnea, for those people who don't know, is when your throat closes in on itself due to looseness of the tissues in the back of your throat. multiple times a night for multiple seconds. So what you're doing is you're losing oxygenation to every organ in your body, your brain, your heart, your liver, your muscles. And when your body doesn't have oxygen, it can't do what it needs to do, and it actually ends up losing cells. And so getting sleep apnea diagnosed and treated is step one for sure.
Can I ask you just a quick question about sleep apnea? Is there a correlation between obesity and sleep apnea?
There's a massive correlation between obesity and sleep apnea. And in fact, if most sleep apnea is treated by treating the obesity, actually. And so, but it's so urgent to fix sleep apnea, people don't realize that you have to treat it while you're losing weight, and so you can't wait to lose the weight. Even 3 months to 6 months of sleep apnea is deleterious. So, but the good news is, even if though you've been living with it for a long time, once you treat it and you turn it around, usually the negative effects are mostly reversible as well. So how do you know you have sleep apnea? If you snore a lot at night, if your significant other tells you snore a lot, there's a great app called Snore Lab, and records your snoring all night long and tells you how much you've had. Have you ever used that one?
Just to embarrass my wife, because she's not a big snorer, but every once in a while I'm like, okay,
Here's your
just
score.
to prove it, Anyways,
That's so funny.
yeah. She still loves me. Pareto 80% of the time.
Yeah, exactly. Except when you show her, look what you did.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, so that's the number one thing. And then there's different ways of treating it. People are scared of CPAP machines, but there's dental devices, there's nasal strips, there's lots of ways to treat that. So that's step one. Then I move on to, okay, in order for us to really know how you're sleeping, we have to do some sort of tracking for a little while. We don't have to do it forever. Some people get stressed out with their Aura rings and their Whoop bands. I actually stopped wearing mine too. I don't need it all the time.
I agree. I mean, I am wearing one now, but I probably haven't looked at the app in 3 or 4 weeks. So it's like performative Aura wearing.
You can look at your monthly average. It's fine.
But yeah, like you said, you can become obsessed with the score such that it trumps your subjective experience of actually being rested.
Right.
And so people look at the score to figure out if they feel rested instead of actually intuitively sensing it in their body. So that gets a little bit twisted.
It does.
But when you're monitoring sleep, are you doing it with a Whoop or an Aura or other device?
I basically let the patient use whatever's going to work the best for them. And I tell them, look, we're not going to do it forever. I just need some data for a few weeks. Number one, on how much deep sleep you're getting, how much REM sleep you're getting, how long it takes you to get to sleep, and also like what does your sleep cycles look like? And with that data, we can start putting in items into your sleep routine and your sleep environment to optimize that. So then we can actually see things working or not working. And so we do that for a little while. Most people choose to do like a little pad underneath their mattress that Withings does because you don't have to wear it all the time. Other people love the constant feedback. And so we use the ring. And so, patients are all different. So you have to meet them where they are. A lot of times you hear podcasts and you hear people on Instagram saying, you must do this. There's no must do.
Must.
Yeah, there's different solutions for different folks, and so we try to meet them where they're at.
I appreciate the non-dogmatism.
Yes.
Okay, so then you gather, there's a data gathering period, and then what's next?
Okay, we have a list of modifiable factors in your sleep environment. Mostly you want to sleep how we're genetically programmed to sleep in a cold, dark cave.
Yeah.
And so we try to cool down the room. There's darkness, so even all the little lights on your TV and your alarm, you want to cover them.
Yeah, can I ask you just about ideal temperature range?
Yeah.
What should we be shooting for?
Below 65 is ideal for most people.
Yeah.
However, a lot of people have trouble falling asleep at 65 degrees. So there's now technology that can cool your bed. You probably have one.
No, I don't, but I'm familiar with it. My wife did not. I use my podcast to embarrass her and by extension embarrass myself. But she doesn't believe in air conditioning or heat. And we're in the high desert here in LA. So at night, people always associate LA with this wonderfully warm climate. But at night, it's cold. Chilly.
Yeah.
So my room is, when I wake up, it's in the 50s all the time.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And
but you can get under the blankets and, you use your own thermogenesis, right?
Right.
to
Absolutely.
make it warm.
Absolutely. And that's actually extremely beneficial for your sleep cycles. That coolness of the room for most people will like push them into deeper levels of deep sleep and keep them there. And then we also talk about the quiet. And so if you live in an urban area, white noise machines are incredible. They really help simulate kind of a quiet environment for people. And that usually makes a major difference. Now, there's all sorts of technological ways you can do this now, like with pads that cool you. There's, red lights that you can put in your room at nighttime that I actually use a red light. We have red lights in our home that we turn on in the evening. But getting those factors right makes a big difference. And then your sleep routine is just as important. So I always tell people your sleep routine starts the moment you wake up, actually. When you wake up, you should go outside, expose your body and your eyes to the outside environment and the sun. That sets your circadian rhythm so that 14 hours later, you can start melatonin secreting and just your entire circadian rhythm for the day. The cortisol, the melatonin waves are all set by that walking outside. Yeah. And then an hour before you go to bed, you want to even set a timer on if you need to. Just remind yourself it's bedtime and off electronics as much as possible. Turn the lights from white to red, start winding down. And so just putting those little things into people's life makes massive difference. And there's other things, of course, we don't have forever to go into all of them, but we have lists of these things that we have people do.
Sure. Just as it pertains to the exposure to morning blue light,
Yes.
is there a certain kind of amount of lux that you should be getting? And I'm asking this because for people that live at higher latitudes or shift workers, are there kind of other options as it pertains to like SAD lamps, et cetera? And is there a protocol associated with that?
Yeah, I think what's going to be your best is to go outside when the sun is out. Okay, even if it's a cloudy day, okay, it's still good to just do the physical act of going outside when the sun is out. And some people wake up before the sun comes out, and I tell them still go outside when the sun is out. It will help set your circadian rhythm. However, there are SAD lamps that are, you can find them on Amazon, that simulate the sun being up. And a lot of people do buy them for their bathroom, for example, where they are shift workers. They'll use those as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I have one. I think it's like 10,000 lux.
Yeah. 10,000 lux, I think is the number.
I think if you sit like about a foot away from it or something and put it in your superior field or something.
Yes.
There's all these tricks, right?
Yes.
And of course, this is another place where, culture has essentially hijacked our biology or that there's evolutionary mismatches, right? Because of course we evolved in relation to our environment over tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years and millions of years if you go back into our hominid past.
Exactly.
We developed these mechanisms in the inferior part of our retina, right, that react to blue light and kind of set this chain
reaction, right?
Chain reaction.
Yeah.
And it's really just about creating that homeostatic balance, right, in your endocrine system between cortisol and melatonin.
Right.
And of course, our screens and other artifacts of modernity disrupt that balance. And so then we have to then take the agency and be educated to actually align back with our engineering.
Right. Absolutely. Very well said. And it's hard to get rid of screens. I mean, I totally recognize that. And, a trick that I use on myself is my overnight chargers in my closet. So, it puts a little bit of time between getting rid of my phone and going to bed and waking up in the morning and I have to go to the bathroom first and then I go get my phone. It puts like 15, 20 minutes in between.
Sure.
And that's enough. The more you can do, the better, of course, but just even a little bit helps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about habits related to food in connection with sleep? Mm-hmm. Are there any kind of optimal recipes, if you will, for that?
Yeah, absolutely. Food in relationship to sleep, mainly what I would say is don't eat a few hours before you go to bed. I always try to get my last meal started before the sun goes down. I think that's the optimal timing, If you think about it, the cavemen probably did that, right? They probably started eating before the sun went down because they knew it was going to be too dark before they couldn't do anything anymore. And so I think, we have that time period where we can digest and then our digestive system needs to turn off so we can get good sleep at night. And when you eat too close to sleep time, it's going to disrupt your sleep. Absolutely.
This is really, really hard culturally, right? Because we want to, sit around the communal table, for hours and enjoy meals together. And that sometimes is later in the evening, after work, et cetera.
Yeah.
So, I try to not be neurotic or fundamentalist about these ideas, but then when you're in your pattern, you try to stick to a good habit, right?
Absolutely. Like in my home, we try to get dinner at 5:30 every night with the kids after they come home from school. And then we usually wrap it up, by 9, 10 o'clock at night, but we've had quite a few hours in between. But then on weekends, we're out with friends, the dinner reservations at 7:30. It's not going to happen, but it's Pareto principle, 5 days out of 7. If you can do it, you're probably winning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we obviously a number of years ago replaced our incandescent bulbs with LEDs, right? Because they're more energy efficient.
Right.
I don't even think incandescent bulbs are legal in some places anymore.
They're not, yeah.
But they were more on the amber spectrum, right? And they produced, in my opinion, a nicer light.
Yeah.
Now, though, LEDs, there are now amber LEDs.
There are, yes.
So now we've then replaced our old LEDs with the amber LEDs.
I went through the same journey as you did with my lighting.
Excuse me. And I tend at night to have these amber motion sensing night lights, and they're in the kind of inferior field.
Yep.
So they're not, stimulating or activating the same mechanisms and of course this is like, dovetails right into our conversation about evolution. Cause what did we do as hunter-gatherers at night? We sat around a fire.
Exactly.
So we sat around amber light in the inferior field,
Right.
and we evolved in relation to that.
Right.
So we just have to live a little bit more, like our Paleolithic ancestors.
Yeah, and you know what makes it worth it though? It actually feels really good to be in an amber lit home at night.
Yeah.
The lighting is just beautiful. It feels warm. It feels cozy.
Right.
It feels homey. It's like there's something programmed in our brain that we know when it feels right versus being under these bright white LED lights all day long, you know?
Yeah, it's true. It's totally true. Great. And obviously, I think people generally understand, the attributes of sleep,
Yeah.
but just to maybe bookend our conversation on sleep, why is it so important?
Right. So, people that sleep less than 7 hours a night, and it's a dose dependent. So if you sleep 6 hours, 5 hours, 4 hours, you're going to have an increased rate of all chronic diseases. Starts with metabolic disease, it moves on to Alzheimer's, cancer, and heart disease, right? And so I think that's number one reason is the prevention of chronic disease, increasing your health span. Number two reason is your performance the next day is massively affected. Yeah. And I'm talking about things that really affect your longevity, like your driving performance, like those kind of things.
Right, that can curtail your longevity quite quickly.
Exactly. So I think that's another reason. And lastly, I think we've grown up in the society that we feel like if we're not sleeping, we're being more productive. But we know that if you get enough sleep, your productivity doubles or triples the next day. So really, you're sacrificing productivity with lack of sleep, not increasing it.
Yeah. It's interesting with the CGM. I can even really notice when I have a poor night's sleep, and this last week has been candidly a bit of a burn for me. And there were probably 3 or 4 nights in a row where maybe I got only 3 or 4 hours of sleep. And I could see it. It was showing up in the CGM. I think it's even one poor night of sleep will make you more insulin resistant. And that's actually adaptive, I think, because in the summertime, back in the old days, you would get less sleep.
Yeah.
You'd become a little bit more insulin resistant, to store a little bit more fat because,
Exactly.
right, winter's fallow is around the corner. So all these things
Exactly.
have a reason.
There's a reason this is all happening. The machine is working.
That's right.
We're just not giving it the right substrates a lot of times. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if you are, I think the moral of that story is if, you're having some metabolic dysfunction or you're pre-diabetic, sleep is going to be a big one.
Huge factor in controlling your glucose curve. The continuous glucose monitor is an incredible device that we've just had access to over the last few years. I had the first one that came out, and like when Levels had their they're telling everyone is pre-release only, and so I got one of the first ones, and it's been a game changer for my patients. And you don't need to wear it all the time, but once again, just like the sleep studies and the sleep tracking, at least 6 to 8 weeks makes a massive difference in how much you learn about your personal biology.
100%. I mean, I often use the analogy, and I'm certainly not alone here, is that you never drive your car without a functioning dashboard. Right. And generally, when the check engine light goes on, I mean, if you were me, you'd blow it off for a few days, but then you deal with it, right?
Exactly.
And so, the same applies to your body. You want that transparency into the vehicle that has no new lease. You can't get a new lease on this one.
Right.
So,
Exactly. The CGM is also great for just learning. I think it's such a great educational tool. I always pair it with Jesse and Shippey's book called Glucose Revolution.
Yeah.
I'm like, here, I want you to wear this and read this.
that.
It's
Yeah.
4 or 5 hour read. You will learn everything you need to know about how to regulate your sugar curves and your and prevent insulin spikes. And it's different for everybody, And so I made a massive difference just from wearing the CGM in my own personal life. And I've seen hundreds of people. We have a lot of patients that come in seeking weight loss medications, some of the peptides that are coming out. But I always say, let's start with the CGM because I want you to learn first what's causing the issues, and then we can do this. And so then they do that, and a lot of them avoid using those medications just from a few weeks of using the CGM.
Yeah. I think, it really unveils a lot of your own kind of bio-individuality, right? Because when I started wearing it, I was like kind of surprised at some of the foods that would spike me and some that others that didn't.
Exactly.
Like a lot of people were like, oh, white rice, you have to just avoid white rice. And I get it. White rice is just completely full of carbs that would normally, I think, spike people. It doesn't really spike me very much. But blueberries did. And that didn't make sense to me. Because blueberries have fiber, and I'm generally eating them in a matrix with other things. But I don't know. For me, that's what happened.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
It has a lot to do with your microbiome. It has to do with how the rice was cooked. So you can make starches resistant as well.
That's true. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And yeah, you're
my
absolutely
starch
right.
generally doesn't get like sitting around because we're always feeding our kids first, right?
Yes.
Then I get it with the leftover of the leftovers.
There you go.
And I think it gets more resistant, like as it cools
does.
and gets reheated, right?
Exactly. So yeah,
Maybe
so
that's
you're
why.
you're actually benefiting from eating last.
I knew there was a reason. Okay, well, this seems like the perfect hop, skip, jump into nutrition,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Since we're almost already there, maybe, let's start maybe with fiber because that was a big deal for me, as I started to unwind my prediabetes and learn about, okay, what are the different techniques that are available to me to minimize those spikes.
Yeah, so fiber is essential for many reasons, but as far as your glucose curve is concerned, it slows the absorption of fructose and sucrose through your GI tract. And it also helps your microbiome deal with the sugars as well. So, I think a lot of people say, well, I'm on an all-meat carnivore diet, I don't need fiber. And the reality of the situation is, well, probably you don't need it to minimize glucose intake because you're not having any sugar, you're just having meat. However, fiber has other essential properties that are needed. Number one, it's a food for your microbiome. Secondly, it promotes motility through your gut. And so people that have a very low fiber diet have a much higher risk of getting colon cancers because things just sit in your gut for way too long. And so I think, as much as people love to get on bandwagons about different types of diets, there's a keto and carnivore, I always say those are fine interventions, those type of diets, but they're not sustainable. And I feel in my mind, they're not healthy forever. Fiber being a core critical reason why you need to vary your diet. You need to take in enough fiber into your diet.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I know that there were quite a few studies that showed a causal relationship between ultra-processed meats and colon cancer, and then a correlation between meat in general and colon cancer. And I always kind of hovered around the meat itself, but maybe it's not the meat, it's actually the lack of fiber. Is that right?
I think that's a big part of it, is the lack of fiber. I think the meat itself is fine. I think the ultra processed meat is a big problem because, you eat what your animals eat. And so those poor animals are eating lots of processed grains, really inflammatory food. You're eating this really inflamed processed meat, which just transfers inflammation into you. And those kind of things are also, I think, causative towards cancer. Inflammation is definitely causative towards cancer. But the lack of fiber in those types of diets can also be a potential problem with colon cancers, for sure. In my surgical life, I used to remove a lot of colon cancers. Most of the colon cancers I removed were in people that just had a diet of nothing but ultra-processed food. They never cooked at home. It was all ultra-processed food, restaurants all the time, fast food restaurants all the time, et cetera.
Yeah. I just got my colonoscopy. And,
Great.
Yeah. It was a good result.
Good.
And and I'm really now I'm on the bully pulpit, really trying to get people to do it, right?
It's an incredibly important test. People don't realize how important it is because it's not just diagnostic. You can treat a cancer before it ever gets to that spot,
Yeah.
And so
It's kind of amazing how they do it too.
Yeah.
They grab them and they can there's all these different techniques depending how big the polyps are and stuff. Anyways,
yep.
it's
I used to
pretty
do
amazing.
those. It's a lot of fun. It's like playing a video game.
Yeah, I assume that's what it's like.
Yeah.
Because I asked my doctor, I was like, I mean, the anesthesia now is so unbelievable. And I did get, full anesthesia, so I was out. And of course, they have to have someone there when you wake up because you think that it hasn't happened yet.
Yes.
It's just so quick. But the next time I kind of want to see if I can, have maybe a lighter dose or whatever. I think you can do that and watch because I'm fascinated by the video game component of it.
Yeah, we see them all the time with people awake, and it's a little bit uncomfortable, but you can really see what's going on. And those polyps, they're precancerous, so removing those before they ever get to that point is incredibly beneficial. So if you haven't had your colonoscopy, I advocate getting it even earlier. I know the recommendations are 45, 50. I say get them at 40, especially if you have a family history of polyps.
Yeah. And you can cauterize them right there, right? And on the bigger ones and stuff.
Yeah,
like that. So
exactly. You can remove them, cauterize them, treat them right then and there.
Yeah. And do you get concerned at all with kind of rebuilding that community of good gut bacteria post colonoscopy, or is that not really a worry because you have to drink what is it called?
Yeah, the
sodium.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The bowel prep, they call it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, if you get a colonoscopy, there is a temporary reduction in the bacteria in your colon. You want to recolonize, so you want to eat lots of fermented foods, yogurt, probiotic yogurts, lots of fiber, vegetables. That's what's going to help you recolonize.
Yeah. I felt like the recovery was pretty quick. It's no big deal.
Right. What's worse for your gut bacteria is ultra-processed food. That's what's really bad for you. And that and things like antibiotics, like Cipro, it's like a nuclear bomb for your gut. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatories like Advil, another nuclear hit to your gut.
Yeah. I mean, that was really the story. I had a hip replacement at 41. And, I was an avid and competitive tennis player for all growing up and into college. And then, have played in my adult life and play a lot more now that I live in California. But I was just popping NSAIDs, like they were going out of style. And all of a sudden I had all these gut problems. And I was like, and then of course I got wise. But I was like, those and, PPIs, I was doing everything wrong.
Yeah.
Everything wrong.
Yeah. So now you're taking NSAIDs and then they're like, you have gut issues and prescribe a PPI. It just is like this constant cycle of things is getting worse and worse. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, just so we kind of go back to nutrition generally. Fiber was really important to me for the reasons that you've just outlined, but also I was cadencing fiber in a particular way. So I was often would have sort of fiber and maybe a bolus of protein first before any carbohydrates, for example, because that would slow down that absorption.
That's exactly right.
And that was I saw a great benefit to my just balancing my blood glucose with that technique. Yeah.
Massive improvement. Just that one little switch. We're not saying don't eat carbs at all. What we're saying is just switch the order. Put the carbs last in your meal. And then the other piece of that is avoid snacking as much as possible on carbohydrates and ultra-processed snacks.
Right.
Snacking is something that was invented by the food industry to just sell more food. It's not that's something that you need to do.
But it's also when you go to a restaurant, what's the first thing they give you?
Yeah. Bread, chips.
And what's the last thing they give you? Ice cream, cake, whatever.
Exactly.
By that time, by dessert, you've already crashed, right? And so then you get another bolus of sweets or refined sugars or whatever. So
right. They never used to give bread at the beginning of the meal before the Farm Bill. That's what started it. Yeah, when there was this overabundance, every restaurant had so much bread. And so they could cut down on their meat portions by serving people bread early in the meal because they weren't as hungry for the meat afterwards.
Yeah. A lot of people go to Europe and eat bread and come back and said, oh, it doesn't bother me. Didn't make me constipated or didn't upset my stomach as much. Is that because they're farming it different, they're harvesting it differently over there? Do you have any insight into that?
There's two things. So if you look at the molecular structure of the gluten in the bread and the pasta in Italy is different than the molecular structure of gluten here. And the reason for that is the processing that we do to the breads here. And so, and the wheat here. And so the wheat here are they're bleached, they're exposed to tons of chemicals. It actually changes the chemical nature of the gluten. And so I think that, I go to Italy, eat a bowl of pasta, and I feel fine. I eat a bowl of pasta here, and I'm bloated for 3 days. And so I think a lot of people have this story, and it's because the gluten is actually different, and it's because they're not using refined wheats as much as we are. They get their wheat. A lot of the times, the restaurants that make the pasta know the farmer that gives them the wheat to make the pasta with.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
That would never happen here. It's gone through 17 different layers of, industry before we get it.
Yeah. I mean, this is certainly not my field of expertise, but as I understand it, they're also like spraying a ton of glyphosate as a desiccant at the end to dry it so they can harvest it all at one time. And then it doesn't stay in the fields at all. Then it just gets like freeze dried or stored in freezers. And there's no kind of natural fermentation process that takes place where, potentially on a farm in Italy, they're bundling it up in the fields, it's staying out there, it's reacting with bacteria, there's a natural fermentation process that's happening and a pre-digestion process, et cetera. And so it just makes it a little bit easier to digest. Right. But I hear that story all the time, and I'm always looking for reasons why. So anyways, my daughter spent a year in Paris, and I went over there, and it was, we indulged because we were there, and it wasn't bad. It felt fine.
No, absolutely. People have a different experience with the pasta and the wheat there for sure.
Yeah. So let's talk maybe just about protein for a minute, because it's definitely come into the limelight, I feel, in the last couple of years, kind of in the wellness sphere, and certainly a lot of doctors and influencers talking about getting like a gram of protein per ideal pound of body weight, et cetera. Where do you fall on the protein spectrum?
I'm actually a big fan of protein as well. I think as we age, we are unfortunately losing muscle mass constantly. Most people, end up in a place where they have sarcopenia, where their muscles are not supporting their bones. That leads to osteopenia, osteoporosis, leads to falls, and then that's why most elderly people demise. And so what I would say is you definitely want to get enough protein. That number for each and every single individual is different. So I know a lot of people are saying a gram per pound of body weight. I think that's a high number and is hard for most people to achieve. I personally do, for myself, do a gram per pound of my body weight. And what I like to do is I like to get people to really understand that, first of all, even just getting some protein in your diet every single meal is a massive step in the right direction. Combine that with strength training, you're going to preserve muscle mass. And then I ask someone, what is your goal? Or I create a goal for them of how much skeletal muscle mass they want to have. And then we get them to get a bioimpedance scale at home and measure their skeletal muscle mass on a weekly basis. And we see if things are headed in the right direction. If the person is strength training and they're not gaining muscle mass, we start adding protein. So a lot of my patients will start off at like half a gram of protein per body weight. And then we go to 0.7, and then we go to 1 gram if we're not maintaining muscle mass. And so I think it's important to like really look at each person as an individual, and people can individualize this for themselves. And then I think a lot of people also just don't even know what does a gram of protein look like. So getting educated on like, a deck of cards size piece of meat, or, a half a bowl of beans is about 25, 30 grams of protein. So understanding what you need per day is also important.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I mean, I'm a little bit new to this, and I've never been one that really like counts my macros.
Right.
At the same time, like you said, I think getting kind of just generally wise as to what substrates you're actually putting in your body is a good thing. Now, there's a little bit of like a Rubik's cube for me of kind of combining some degree of intermittent fasting with also getting enough protein. So for a while, when I was very overweight and I was kind of on the early part of my mission to get metabolically healthy, I was pretty stringently 16-8 for a whole variety of different reasons.
Sure.
And you're not necessarily going to lose weight. I mean, I've certainly ate like 10 pints of ice cream within an 8-hour period. So, you can gain weight too. You can. But generally, if you're paying attention, you're being mindful about a fasting protocol, you're probably eating better foods, and you're probably calorie restricting. Not necessarily, but probably. Yes. And so I definitely saw, in combination with a lot of other things that I was doing, weight loss associated with a 16-8 protocol. Then, subsequently, I've sort of relaxed that a little bit, but I'm still, maybe 14-10 or, whatever, 13-11 or something like that. Right. So then I was like, okay, but I need to put on some more lean muscle mass. So how would I weigh maybe about 162 pounds. So how do I get 162 grams of protein in a 10-hour period? It's not that easy, really.
No.
And so you have to kind of get these kind of big bolus of protein so I started doing that in the morning. I started doing like a lot of like non-fat plain yogurt, for example.
Sure.
And then
high protein, right?
Yeah, high protein, and then some relatively mindful of the overall caloric intake to get a non-fat option, even though I got nothing against fat per se, but it can be caloric, especially if you're trying to get all that protein. So anyways, do you have a way to solve this little Rubik's Cube of like, eating within a intelligent window, so you're not just eating all the time, but then also being able to get enough macros like protein?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if we go back to the Pareto principle, for people that are trying to lose weight, the biggest piece of advice that can move the needle the most is just get rid of ultra-processed food. Once you do that, then we look at what's the calorie intake look like for this individual. Intermittent fasting is not right for everybody. It's right for some people. It's usually right for people like you and I, men that are trying to lose weight, that have a trouble controlling the total number of calorie intake in the day. And so that's the kind of people that we will try intermittent fasting with. What I would suggest in your particular case is say, okay, intermittent fasting did what it needed to do. It helped you get to a weight that you're comfortable with. You controlled your caloric intake as much as you could, as much as you needed to get to a good weight. Now maybe it's time to think about just eating breakfast every morning, eating some vegetables and protein for breakfast, actually, avocados and eggs, et cetera. And because your protein really needs to be spread out throughout the day. Taking a big bolus doesn't do a lot of good. It needs to be dosed throughout the day when your body can absorb it and use it. And so just aiming for that number without spreading it out throughout the day probably not helping a lot, to be honest with you.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really needs to be spread out. So I would say intermittent fasting is a great technique to use. It's an intervention, I call it, when we need to get to a specific goal, weight loss. Okay. I don't think people need to really do it forever. And in fact, the research is showing it's not right for everybody.
Yeah.
The kind of the longevity benefits have been a little bit overblown for 16/8 fast. You know, there is, I think, still a lot of benefit to doing something like what Walter Longo talks about, the longer term fast, a 5-day fast,
Right.
water fast, or, fasting mimicking diets for clearing senescent cells. But I use 16/8 fast with my patients very successfully, actually, in weight loss. But beyond that, not really, you know? Yeah.
Some of the kind of autophagy inducing
Exactly.
components might not be there for 16/8.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. It really takes that kind of longer term shock to your system where you're fasting for more than 3 days to really get that autophagy benefit.
Interesting. Do you care about specific amino acids? Like, for example, okay, yeah, we want to get X amount of protein, but do you care about like leucine or a branch chain amino acid specifically for hypertrophy? Like, should we focus on that level of granularity?
No, I mean, this is where we talked about this
I
in the
kind of
beginning.
know what the answer is, but yeah.
I can tell you, we measure amino acid levels on our patients and metabolites, and I can tell you, for people that get adequate protein, they're all fine. Like if you get your protein from various sources and you're doing good, even my vegans and vegetarians, like their protein levels are fine, including all the amino acids. So I'm often very surprised at what the body's able to do with food and molecules. And I don't necessarily send them down the rabbit hole of a particular branching amino acid powder.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, look, there are some athletes that are really trying to build massive amounts of muscular volume, in which case those things could prove useful. But my answer is generally, for the most part, no.
Right. Yeah. So, and this maybe is the good bridge into the next kind of foundational element of exercise, because as we pointed to, muscle protein synthesis is obviously very important. Obviously very important to stave off sarcopenia, particularly as we get older. I think we lose like 10% of our muscle mass every decade or something. So
Exactly.
so that's huge. And, I've read the statistics around, if you fall and break a hip and you're like above 80, it's like
Almost 100% chance of death from that. It's not survivable.
Right. So obviously there's that. What I found with, and I'm certainly far from Lou Ferrigno, but even just with some additional muscle mass on myself, as a muscle, as sort of a glucose sink or a metabolic organ, was incredibly influential on my glucose levels.
Huge. Yep.
So let's talk about that. Let's move into exercise and some of the core principles of what we should be looking for from kind of exercise protocol.
Absolutely. This is great. So I actually termed this particular category movement because the Pareto principle here is, before you even start focusing on your exercise routine, we need to fix the sedentary behavior in your life. Okay.
Yeah.
These are two independent variables. I don't care if you go to the gym 2 hours a day. If you're sitting at a desk 8 hours a day, you are still causing massive metabolic damage, right? And also muscle loss and muscle wasting, all the bad things. And so sedentary behavior has been intimately associated with Alzheimer's disease, cancer, and heart attacks, strokes, all of it. And so what you really want to do is focus on that first. Now, if you're a person that sits in the car for a long time, or sits at home on the couch for a long time, or working, in fact, for 8 hours, like I get into total flow mode sometimes on your computer, right?
Totally.
And so the hack here, and it's been very well researched, is called exercise snacks, where you take a 5-minute break every 45 minutes and just move around. And it could be as little as going to the water fountain and drinking some water, or you can do some jumping jacks, some push-ups, you can do some squats, just movement. I actually have a timer on my computer that shuts off my computer screen after 45 minutes for me to get up and move around.
I feel like we should do it right now. We've probably been going for about, we got to do some
I think
squats.
we have been. You're right. and I actually work on a walking desk all day. So
Okay,
it's
yeah.
my saviors, completely changed
Yeah.
my life, game changer.
A number of my employees do that, and I think it's great. When I'm talking on Zoom with them, I feel a little seasick.
Yeah.
That's just I kind of tease them about it a little bit, but I'm like, that's a good idea. We should be doing that.
Right.
And there's this whole. I think that the acronym is like NEAT, right? Like non-exercise activity
Yes.
training. I'm not sure
Something
if I
like
got
that.
it right.
I can't remember, but you're
Yeah.
right.
But it's
non-exercise activity, basically.
Yeah. But it's basically like we have kind of pathologized exercise in a way, like we do everything where it's just like, we're going to work 10 hours and then we're going to go to the gym and like move,
Bang it
exercise,
out, right.
bang it out for an hour,
Exactly. Spend an hour on the treadmill for 8 miles per hour. Yeah,
right.
exactly.
So we've cubbied hold all these kind of areas of our life instead of just integrating it. And again, it goes back to the evolutionary mismatches. Right. Like, how did we used to move? Well, we moved.
How do you think humans got all over the world from being, starting off in one little spot in Africa? Is because humans are wanderers. We are meant to walk around. One of the things that humans have as an evolutionary advantage is our ability to move long distances for long periods of times.
Right.
Other animals can't do that. And so we need to keep our bodies in constant motion. If you're not doing that, you gotta do that before you even go to the gym. It's much better to get yourself active throughout the day. So that's the first thing that we fix for people.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, just get out, take a walk, set a timer if you need to. Do 20 push-ups or especially after meals, right?
The best walk you can take is after a meal.
Yeah.
After lunch and dinner. Even
That's
breakfast.
also an amazing blood glucose
Massive blood glucose,
regulatory
right.
device, right? That
Exactly.
was big. And especially after dinner, the worst thing you can do, right, is eat dinner late.
And then plop down in the bed.
Yeah, right. Worst thing. And we
worst
do
thing.
it all the time. I mean, our culture
Guaranteed
totally
sleep
does it.
disruption, right?
Yeah. And it's so great to go out after dinner and take a walk. Or
It
we
is.
have a very animated dishwashing routine in our house.
Nice.
We put away everything. That's
I
like,
love it.
so the kids get involved and we're putting music on and just even that, just move around a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic.
But obviously, there's a level
more.
of movement that beyond just doing the dishes.
Right, absolutely. So, when I see patients, we try to categorize them into where they fit in the whole world of exercise. You have your people that don't do any exercise, or they just go once a week, maybe one class a week of Pilates, maybe, and then you have those people that are, I call them like the gym rats, that are just doing muscle training, and then you have like the cardio enthusiasts that are just running an hour in the gym 5 days a week, right? And so I really try to, unless you're trying to achieve some very specific athletic goal, we really try to incorporate variation in people's exercise routine, try to balance their routine. And we base it a lot also on measuring their skeletal muscle mass. So it's either a DEXA scan or bioimpedance scale. And we also like to get measurements of like VO2 max.
Yeah.
So really see kind of where the cardio fitness is like. And we emphasize those particular activities in a varied routine, but we never unvary a routine. So there's always 3 days of strength training. There's always 4 to 5 days of cardio. And I like to also incorporate, especially as we age, some sort of mobility type of strength training routine as well.
me too.
Yes, exactly. So things like sled pulling, carrying, hanging from a bar, those types of things that are not normal part of like your gym routine, but they're fun to do, and it makes you feel like, good, I can do these things still.
Yeah,
You know?
like body weight exercises.
Yeah.
A lot of that. I became kind of quasi addicted to doing pull-ups. Just
Right.
I loved the feeling of being able to pull my own weight, kind of literally and figuratively or whatever. But and then I've started to integrate the Bozu ball a lot more. Do you know those things? They're kind
Yes.
of
Yeah.
so they're great for balance.
Huge.
And sometimes I'll do like a lightweight routine or air squats on the Bozu ball because you're kind of working all your helper muscles and it also candidly like really focuses me, because you can't really be unfocused on a blizzard ball. You just fall off.
It's incredible
So-
for balance.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we lose our balance as we age. It's just something that happens. And that loss of balance is also what contributes to a lot of injuries in the gym and also falls, et cetera.
Yeah, I've been also trying to go more barefoot. And I got all these kind of barefoot mimicking shoes
Yes.
now. And they're quite stylish. The new ones are very good. And just for balance and just to feel a greater sense of connection with the earth.
I totally agree.
And also all the musculature that you can develop, that sometimes doesn't get developed when you wrap your foot in big amounts of plastic and metal and stuff.
Right. I also use those shoes to go rucking. Do you do any rucking?
A little bit. Well, you'll see my steps outside my house. I have 93 steps up to my kitchen, and I do go grocery shopping. So just by dint of my own life, I ruck. I ruck, therefore I am. Right. I do more rucking than the other thing that rhymes with rucking. I have 3 girls in my house. They're only rucking. Or now I've seen those vests that you can fill with water or sand or something, right?
Or just even weights,
But those are great. It's like just integrating what I sometimes call the protocols of inconvenience.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So take the stairs instead of the escalator. Just little things in your life that, feel like short-term pain, but they're always long-term gain.
Absolutely. I always equate people's health in many different ways to like a bank account, right? Like if you're constantly withdrawing from it and, sitting around all day and doing nothing, and then you just go home and sit around all day again, you're just withdrawing all the time. But just taking the stairs instead of the escalator adds a little bit to the bank account, right? And so as long as you think of it that way, like there's always going to be a withdrawal and deposit type of relationship. You just got to remember to keep making the deposits.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, absolutely. So do you have like a formula? I mean, you outlined it a bit, between like zone 2 and zone 5 and between aerobic and resistance training and, and then a little bit of mobility. Is it kind of like...
Yes. Yeah. So basically it's based on each individual's skeletal muscle mass and their VO2 max where we need to focus. However, Peter Attia has written a lot about this. He's done an incredible job of detailing some protocols. And so what we do is we'll do 5 days of zone 2 training for most individuals. Zone 2 is, the resting perceived exertion where you can kind of talk, but you don't want to. And we'll do that for about 45 minutes.
It's like your mom, like talking to your mom. You can kind of talk, but you don't necessarily want to.
Exactly.
No, I love my mom.
And so we do that. We try to get people to do that about 5 days a week. And then we do strength training 3 times a week. Right. And then we also do like some fun outdoor activity. And then I really like to mix in, if you have the availability, to mix in some hot cold therapy once a week as well. So if you have a place near you or your gym or your community has a sauna and maybe a cold therapy plunge or a cryotherapy or even your cold shower, doing that one day, like a protocol where you do 20 minutes and then 3 minutes, we try to mix that in 1 day a week. That's not necessary. You can even do that on your own separately. Yeah. But I like to give people a day a week off from working out, and that's a good way to replace that.
And then what about kind of like a zone 5 max
once
here?
A week. Yeah.
Once a week. Okay.
Once a week minimum. There are some people that have a very poor VO2 max, and so then we'll go do it maybe 2 or 3 times a week, but once a week at a minimum.
Yeah. And when you see patients, how reliable are the bioimpedance scales in your mind? I have a pretty good one. I did a DEXA scan. I actually did it in a van.
Yeah,
they have
that's
these
what I
mobile
did mine
vans,
too. Yes.
And then I got the results, and then I A/B'd them against the bioimpedance scale, and it was pretty close.
Yeah.
And then I just go on the relative values between the bioimpedance. Is that kind of more or less?
Yeah,
what
I think it's more. I think you need the DEXA scan to know where you are for real and to know kind of what you need to focus on. The DEXA scan is also great for visceral fat and bone density. Now, the bioimpedance scales, even though they don't match perfectly with the DEXA scan, if you do them at the same time every day, first thing in the morning, you get a really good trend line. And just more about following the trend line
Right.
than anything, right?
Yeah. So it's like a value in relation to itself or something
Right,
like that.
exactly.
Cool. Is there any, I mean, I know that you don't necessarily have a affiliation with any bioimpedance scales, but is there anyone that you can recommend?
Yeah, I love the InBody H20N,
that's the one I have,
with
yeah.
the two handles, because it sends a bioimpedance signal through your arms as well. So you get a trunk mass as well calculated in there.
Yeah. And
Whereas
they
the
just
other one
sync
just goes
with
through
an
the
app,
legs.
right? And
And the app is great. They've done a really great job with the app to kind of follow skeletal muscle mass and body fat.
yeah.
Yeah.
What's the body fat percentage you should be shooting for male and female?
I think it's different for everybody. Somewhere in the range of 15 to 18%, and from women a little bit higher.
higher,
Yeah, I mean, I've right now my body fat percentage is about 11%.
Wow.
Yeah, so I've
amazing.
Yeah, I've really built a lot of muscle lately. But if I get to 12, 13%, I'm not going to be mad at myself.
Yeah. I think I was around 15 or 16 or something,
Yeah.
which was when I got really, really lean. It was probably I didn't measure it at that juncture, but it's very hard for me to gain muscle without also gaining some fat.
Yes, but that's what your bioimpedance scale will tell you, because it's kind of using an algorithm to figure out how much is muscle, how much is fat.
Yeah.
What I would say is that use your DEXA scan as your real guide. How often do you get your DEXA scan?
I've only gotten it once, so a couple months ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay, good. So a couple months ago.
Yeah.
Do it every 6 months. It's such a low radiation. It's a great, easy thing to do, and you learn a lot from the DEXA scan. I mean, you look great. I mean, you don't have a lot of visceral fat. You're building muscle. I think for you don't need to do it, but I think what I try to do with my patients is at least once a year get a DEXA,
Yeah.
so we know
And
where
it's
we're at.
I'm so quick. It was like 6 minutes or
Yeah,
something,
it's so quick, right?
and pretty cheap.
Yeah, $50, very comfortable.
Why not?
Yeah, it's not like you're in a little scanner. It's like this
No,
big
yeah,
machine.
yeah. I was like, because I am claustrophobic, and I hate like getting full body MRIs and things like that.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, do I really want to do this? And it was like nothing.
No, yeah, this is very
I mean,
different.
the
than
van
MRI.
was worse than the actual machine. I was like, I don't want to be in this weird
Exactly,
van.
yeah. And it's really easy. I mean, they're all over the country now. If you just Google DEXA scan in my city,
Yeah.
there's about 3 or 4 different franchises now that they can provide this for you at different places.
Yeah, I think the one here in LA was Body Spec.
Body Spec was one, right?
I think they have their main office in Culver City, and then
Right.
they have the DEXA van. You can actually hire the DEXA van
You can.
to come to your house if you have like a bunch of friends over.
Right, you can.
That's what nerds like us do. We have friends over.
We scan everybody.
We can scan everyone, yeah, and then we do it again. Cool. What else? Anything else we should be thinking about in terms of exercise or even the stacking of the 3 together? So
Yeah. Another big point I make in exercise is around recovery. Now we're learning more and more. If you're exercising when you're not fully recovered, you can actually be causing more inflammation, more damage to your joints, more injuries, etc. So, listen to your body. If you don't feel recovered, people will get to know their bodies pretty well. When you're getting sick or you've traveled a lot, if you don't feel recovered, sometimes it's better to take a day off and do something low impact, right? Yeah. Secondly, there's all sorts of recovery scores now based on heart rate variability. I think some of them are good. Some of the devices are good. However, I still go by how I feel versus just purely the HRV measurement, So I think that's an important part on it too. As far as stacking goes, most people don't have time to go to the gym 5 times a week, and so if we only really get 3 days a week, we will stack cardio and weightlifting. And really, I think you're splitting hairs if you're going to do one first or the whatever second. For most people, just do whatever works the best. Like keep you in the gym to get the recommended workout done. That's what you want to do.
Yeah. Any supplements that you could recommend in connection with hypertrophy, like creatine or anything like that?
I'm a big fan of creatine. 5 grams of creatine has been shown to be extremely beneficial. A lot of research around it. Work your way up to that. Some people get bloated with water retention.
Right.
And even if you can work your way up to 8 grams, that's been shown to prevent neurodegenerative disease as well. Yeah. It's
Interesting.
a great supplement.
Yeah. Yeah. And like so cheap.
So cheap, right?
Yeah. You get like this tub.
Yeah.
I think I have the Thorn or something.
I have Thorn as well.
And
Yeah,
it's
the
just
Thorn
like,
cup.
I can't get through it.
Yeah, and it mixes well with anything. You
yeah.
know, you can put in your morning smoothie, or you might put in my coffee actually every morning.
Do you really?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
don't
And
even taste it.
doesn't taste. Yeah.
it tastes like anything.
Yeah. Are you a coffee drinker?
I am. Yeah, I drink a couple cups of coffee every morning. Lots. I drink it because I love it, but it's also, there's always a big coffee debate.
Yeah. Big coffee debate.
I know. I never drink it afternoon. I actually drink the Four Sigmatic mushroom coffee. So
yeah.
it's mushroom elixir mixed with coffee.
What about alcohol? What's Darshan's opinion?
Yeah. I'm very realistic about alcohol, mainly because I love a glass of wine every once in a while myself. And
It's a good reason to be realistic.
Exactly. So look, I mean, the fact is, there's no amount of alcohol that's good for you, despite the industry trying to convince us of that for decades. So obviously, no alcohol is going to be the best. I think that 2 drinks a day for men, 1 for women, and I think even that number for women is up for debate, is probably not going to be harmful. I do think that you need to put days in between not drinking. Okay, so the thing about having a daily cocktail or daily glass of wine with dinner, probably I think that does more harm than the actual amount of alcohol that you're drinking over time. So my kind of protocol I give to people is drink less than 2 glasses of whatever it is. Try not to use mixtures with your liquor. Try to avoid beer because there's all the other things in beer.
It's just a damn shame.
Yeah.
I love the taste of beer,
Yeah.
but I just cannot touch it.
Right.
I can't touch it.
Yeah.
It's just
Get
immediate
bloated and-
bloat.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's always the first sip that's the best anyway. So maybe every once in a while, my wife will pour me what I call the thimble.
The thimble.
I can get away with the thimble. She uses like a dollhouse glass.
wow.
She goes, "Neat." Like I'm like,
She's
like,
almost
okay.
teasing you.
Yeah, she is. But I ask for it. I'm like, just give me a thimble of your IPA. But yeah, avoid beer. I concur.
And most importantly, I would say is if you have a day where you've binged, which is more than 4,
Well,
take a week off
yeah, I
afterwards.
can't do that.
Yeah, more than 4, take a week off. A lot of people do. A lot of people share a couple bottle of wines with a friend, and they get there.
Yeah, have you ever gotten into the natural wines? You know that deal?
Yeah, the biodynamic natural wines.
Yeah. Well, and some of them have, because they're fully fermented,
Right.
they have no sugar left in
Right.
them, and
Right.
they generally have lower alcohol content.
They do.
So,
Yes. Mhm.
Yeah.
There's some companies that will send you a box of natural wine every month.
Yeah. Yes. We probably know some of them.
Yep.
Yeah. They're generally European, and the whites, the Sauvignon Blancs are quite decent.
You bring up a good point too. In America, we have no restrictions on what you can add to the wine.
Yeah.
Whereas in Europe, you are absolutely prohibited from adding any coloring, anything to the wine at all.
Yeah. Well, you notice if you pick up a wine bottle, you know what's not on the label?
Ingredients.
Yeah, nutrition label.
Yeah,
There is no
exactly.
nutrition label. Because I believe it's not regulated by the FDA. It's regulated by like the Treasury Department. Some random thing. Anyways.
That's interesting. I
Yeah.
didn't know that.
There's no nutrition label on there. So there could be, GMO. They'll add sulfite. Oh, God, I used to know all this stuff. But essentially, they kill off the natural occurring yeast.
Right.
And then they add like a GMO yeast because they know how it's going to interact and be very, very regular.
Yep.
And that's going to produce higher sulfite content. And
Right.
they're going to like stop the fermentation process early. So there's still a lot of sugar in there. And so,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
I think
Even coloring and other
Yeah.
chemicals, right?
there are actually some decent biodynamic wines
There
now. They
are.
used to be just undrinkable, but now they're actually drinkable.
You'll have to give me some names of
Yeah.
the ones you like.
Yeah, they're better.
I've experimented for a long time, and I kind of stopped having good luck with them for a while, and so I stopped. And I know I've heard a lot of good ones coming
Yeah.
out lately. So
Yeah, I think they're better. and then, tequila for me, if I'm going to drink a liquor, seems to be the one that has the most minimal impact.
Yes.
At least the next day. So
Usually like a Blanco instead of a Reposado.
and just obviously, and just neat or just on the rocks. I think you're right. The worst thing is like the mixtures, right?
The mixtures, right.
And it's like, what is it, like 7 calories per gram, right? So it is pretty caloric, and you're not getting anything with those calories.
Absolutely.
So,
Right.
except laughs.
Exactly.
I mean, it's GABAergic, right? And this is sometimes the debate I have with the hardcore abstinence people. Yes, I can acknowledge, like, it's a neurotoxin, it's a carcinogen, and if you're really gonna, you wouldn't get in an Uber or like,
Sure.
or stay at a hotel because there'd be, chemicals off gassing from the mattress. I mean, you can like, you can't really completely escape toxins.
Absolutely. And look, I mean, some of the toxin levels, they're going to be there, but like you said, there's beneficial effects too. You're getting more GABA, you're decreasing cortisol levels. Some of the studies around less heart disease in people that drink some wine, even, all the studies around Mediterranean diets and also, blue zones.
Right.
There's a lot of wine involved in all those.
I mean, those might be healthy user bias, a little bit.
Maybe.
But yeah, I mean, to the point, I mean, listen, like, well, maybe this is a good place to go. Given that my company is called Commune, there is increasing data. There's more and more data out there about the impact of social connections and health, right? The strength of your community and social connections seems to be a big determinant in all cause mortality. And sometimes a little bit of wine is a very potent social lubricant.
Exactly. That communal relationship is so key. We were talking a little bit of having dinner with your friends. And, when you have dinner with your friends and you're at home, these things drag out for 3 to 4 hours, which is fantastic. That's what meals are supposed to be.
Yeah,
They're not
right.
supposed to be like a 1.5 hour reservation. You got to be out by 8 o'clock, or the speedy meals that you have sometimes at home when you're trying to, get through the day. So I think, there's a lot of benefits to those communal meals, especially, and just everything around having good social connections. I think loneliness is really a disease, and it does lead to much higher rates of all the other chronic diseases as well, and something you have to actively kind of fight against.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You seem like you derive a tremendous amount of gratification through fostering connection. It seems like that's kind of one of your, I mean, I always hear about you in relation to like, oh yeah, Darshan introduced that person to that person and this person, then he put together that thing, and I met through that, and it's like, that seems to be a central component of your life.
It really is. I mean, I love being around people. I get a lot of energy from it. I love putting on things like conferences, like I'm doing one this week.
It's a big one.
I just love everything around community and being part of different communities and just being out. And I love being social. And so I think that's just me, though. I think there's also a group of people that are, it's hard for them to do that. And I don't think that's bad. I just think that there's different ways to achieve the same benefits, but work within those constructs.
Yeah, I think the key is, do your social connections actually meet your social needs?
Right.
And that's a little bit different for everyone. I mean, would you describe yourself as an extrovert, or are you like an ambivert, or?
Yeah. I would say I'm an extrovert, and at times I'm also an introvert. There's times that I just want to get away for a little while, just be myself, and there are times I do experience social anxiety myself as well, and I think that's all normal. I think you have to give yourself leeway to experience all of those things, But I do have a few patients that are introverts, and we actually do like testing to see, what's your social kind of group you fit into. And for introverts especially, they need, it's so good to realize who is an introvert, especially in your social circle, because then you give them the space they need to take a break, to decompress after a social event. And for the gregariously social people, it's also good to know who those people are, because you need to feed them more of that. You know?
I mean, there's people who, I mean, this may be apocryphal, but you always heard about like President Clinton, for example, who just fed on people, that he got more energy from being around people. And for me, it's not that way. Like I just came off a multi-day retreat where you make yourself incredibly available to people, and then like Sunday night I had to like crawl into a hole and disappear and just like not talk to anyone. But I think with people that are introverts, you have to kind of decipher whether are they having like a dorsal vagal response, like because of some kind of trauma or chronic stress or anxiety in their life, or are they just more comfortable and creative and peaceful and don't necessarily need that surfeit of social connection? And again, I think everyone's different in that regard. Do you get nervous because you publicly appear quite a bit? You're on podcasts, you're on stages. Do you get nervous either before or during or after?
I probably do, but I've convinced myself that I love doing this. And so because I love doing it, the nerves are gone,
Yeah.
And so I do remember when I first started doing all of this at the beginning of my health journey, I was nervous. I have all the typical things, the imposter syndrome, like who am I to be speaking of this? And there was a couple of times that I had to talk myself up to doing an appearance. I remember very clearly I was speaking at Singularity University once, and it was one of my first talks on health and wellness. And I had just got to the point where I had got off my last medication. And right before I was about to get on stage, I just thought to myself, I shouldn't be talking about this. Like I barely know what I'm talking about. And I got an anxiety attack. And I, through the help of my friends, I was able to work my way through it. But these are all normal things that happen to people. And I think, I think that if giving yourself the leeway to experience these things is just part of human existence. And if you do that, you're going to be successful in whatever endeavor you choose.
Yeah, I think so. I think Billie Jean King said, pressure is a privilege.
Yes.
Right?
I love that. Yes.
So if you feel that sense of nerves before you're doing something like that, you can look at it and say, oh my God, this is such an amazing privilege that I have, to be able to address this group of people who I respect, for example.
Exactly.
And it's interesting because the physical sensation of being nervous is so similar to the physical sensation of being excited.
Exactly.
It's just more the mindset. It's like what valence and salience do you actually apply to that feeling?
Right.
So you can really think about it as like, oh my God, there's an overwhelming sense of anxiety here. Or it also can be, oh, this is a wonderful wave of excitement and joy and anticipation I'm having for this moment. And, it's hard to do that necessarily in the moment, but over time you can develop that as a skill, I think.
Yes, absolutely. And it's actually one of the key ways to treat anxiety is kind of changing your self-talk around what's happening when that feeling occurs. Right?
Yeah. Well, I would love to continue this conversation because we covered maybe like to one quartile of the principles, and then we started
there.
And then we're talking a little bit about socio-emotional regulation, which I find to be, I'm more and more interested in that topic, because mindset and the ability to bring yourself back to center can often sit behind all of these other protocols.
1,000%. It's if you don't have that piece at least managed, or at least bring that to the forefront, and you put it behind all these other protocols, all these protocols become less effective.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, we all have this biological imperative to survive, right? And that's a evolutionary adaptation. Of course, kind of in the modern era, that part of ourselves, that part of the autonomic nervous system is constantly triggered, right? So what happens, when we have kind of a sympathetic overload or amygdala hijack, however you want to call it, you know what happens. Everyone knows that it happens just by subject of experiencing it. Your heart rate goes up, your breath rate goes up, glucose shoots out to your extremities so you can use your muscles, et cetera. your pupils dilate, but there's something else that happens, that your aperture gets smaller,
Right.
and your attention becomes very kind of self-focused,
Exactly.
and you don't trust the outside world. In fact, you see the outside world as a threat. And that is, again, completely adaptive, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
but what does that mean then in terms of the rest of your life, in terms of your ability to do any of the things that we just talked about? Sleep? No way.
No.
No way. Eat properly? No way. Your digestion is shutting down.
Shutting down. Right.
Build social connections? Not a chance,
Right.
So all of these things, so that ability to refine that capacity to emotionally regulate such that you can bounce back and bring yourself back into sort of ventral vagal state or just a parasympathetic state. This speaks to our success as a species, right? It's been predicated on this ability to leverage our neo-mammalian brain and our rational brain and find places to cooperate and trust the world around us. So.
Exactly. And, this kind of sympathetic response state that many of us live in all the time, what happens is, if you're living in that all the time, every time you have something that really does happen, it raises that sympathetic state to a new baseline. And this also happens for your cortisol secretion as well.
Yeah.
And now that becomes your new baseline. So if you don't get away from this for a little while, then you're going to keep upregulating until you're just constantly spiraling, both with like oversecretion of cortisol and leading to, adrenal fatigue and all those things, but also with your sympathetic state. And so the solution to this is find ways to cut it off at its knees so that you always go back down to a baseline again. And so a lot of people, they've forgotten what their baseline even is. And so it takes some deprogramming to do that. But I'm a big advocate for cortisol release. Same thing that we talked about with exercise snacks. Every 45 minutes, if your cortisol doesn't start secreting until 30 to 45 minutes after a stressful event, what if you just stop the stress every 30, 45 minutes? You never get that cortisol boosts, And same thing works with your sympathetic state. What works really well for being in a sympathetic state is doing something like breath work, where you're stimulating the vagus nerve with deep breaths, and that really brings you down. So every time you feel like you're getting a little bit, hyperstimulated, taking that moment to do some breath work is massively beneficial.
I know it was beneficial on the Uber ride from Malibu.
Right? I had multiple breathwork sessions.
The LA traffic will make you a breathwork master, if nothing else.
Exactly. So true.
Well, it's been a delight. I have Darshan, right? So this is to be in the presence of a deity.
Oh, thank
right?
you. You're so sweet. Thank you.
Or this is a concept in Hinduism that we sometimes talk about, but it really points to having a spiritual experience or spiritual connection, and you make that so easy for people. You're so available, and that really speaks to the kind of person that you are.
Well, I mean, the feelings are very mutual, and I really appreciate you having me to have this discussion. I hope this is the first of many.
Yeah, I think we can do a lot of good together.
Yes,
So
yes.
Thank you, Darshan. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeff. I really appreciate being here.
Hey, thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then I think you'll love this one too.